There are a lot of purposes for rules. Rules can guide us, rules can train us, but that's not a way to manage a relationship over the long haul. And I always liken it to driving a stick shift car. At first, you have to have the almost rules like first you put your foot on the clutch while you have your foot on the brake, and you mechanically do all these different things. But before long, it's automatic. You don't even think about it. You're independent of the rules. The rules may still be there, but they're not the focus anymore. You're driving. You're not trying to shift. You're driving the car.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, President of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Welcome to another episode of Homeschool Talks. My guest today is Dr. Roger Smith, and there's a little bit of a story here. We actually did this it was maybe the best podcast ever, at least one that I have been participating in, a few months ago. And due to some kind of gremlins in the system, the recording of my voice disappeared. So the options were for us to play Roger's answers by themselves, or have me come in and do American Sign Language of whatever I said from the transcript, or try to pretend like I was recording my side of the conversation from scratch, or we could talk to Roger again. So we chose to talk to Roger again. And he's going to say exactly the same thing that he said last time because it was really good. So welcome, Dr. Roger Smith.
Well, thank you. And you have more faith in my memory than I do. So we'll give it another shot. So it's my pleasure to be here again. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
So the good news is that I won't remember either, so we're fine. We're fine. So the thing we wanted to talk about today is, and I'm a little jealous because I might have been the first one to interview you. I don't know, but I was right up there, pretty close to the front. And you have since been podcasting with lots and lots of people about your great new book, Parenting with Influence. And so, I guess I'm sort of disappointed. I feel jealous because you learned so much on that first podcast with me, and now you're like an old pro. And I don't have the fresh Roger today, but we're gonna try it anyway.
You had the raw version. Now maybe it's a little bit more polished.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Roger. You're a longtime homeschooler, homeschool dad, homeschool leader. Give us a little background. Yes.
Well, our homeschool story is that I was in medical school, and I'm a country doctor. So when I was in medical school, my wife and I were teaching a 5th grade Sunday school class at our church. And one Saturday afternoon, we were having a little get-together for the Sunday school class at our house. And a new family came to town that we were expecting. There was a new associate pastor coming from your state of Oregon, your original state. At any rate, they showed up and drove by the house and dropped off these kids at the party, which I thought was rather bold on their part, just to hand over their kids. But we were struck with how well these children engaged with us. They were confident. They were bright. They knew the scripture. It was impressive, and we said, what is going on with these kids? Come to find out, that was our first encounter with a homeschooled student. And immediately our antennas went up. We went, okay, this looks like something we should learn about. And it was a few years later that we had our first child, and but Jan was already determined that she would home educate because she was bored in school. And but we began, despite all of our family's uh, thoughts that we were crazy. And of course, you do have to be a little bit crazy. But we were crazy enough to take on the adventure, and it has been quite an adventure. And we learned a lot along the way, and eventually we're kind of drawn into leadership, and we've played a lot of different leadership roles in the homeschool community, trying to help other people be successful at it as well.
So you were talking about leadership. Well, let's circle back. You mentioned your wife, Jan. Tell us about Jan, because Jan is a powerhouse person.
That's a good description, and it requires a lot more of me living with such a powerhouse woman. She's decisive. She is a quick thinker, a quick communicator, and she's passionate about what she decides. And so once she saw this home education thing and saw how the potential results and the potential way it would fit into our family, she was passionate, and she is quite a powerful person wanting to make things happen. And so no is not a word that she uses very often. She overcomes obstacles, and there just really was never an obstacle that we went, okay, this isn't going to work for us. But because she is such a strong individual, she learned things. She was always engaging other people that were a few steps ahead of us. And when we got started, there weren't very many people ahead of us, but there was the true pioneers. I call us. We were in wave 1.5 on the homeschool journey. We weren't quite in the second wave, but somewhere in there, we had the advantage of following people that had really blazed the trail. And so Jan was hot on their trails, trying to learn from those who had gone before. And it's been a major part of the success that we experienced as a homeschool family.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that she liked to learn stuff, and I can attest that she learned me some stuff over time. She's a real dedicated mom, homeschool leader. Just a delight to be around, and she does have an opinion or two. I will say that.
Yeah, and one other aspect to her that I would love to mention here is that she really cares for moms that are in the trenches. And she does a lot of mentoring locally, and over the telephone signal and internet, she coaches a number of folks, just wanting them to be successful and to feel better. Moms for some reason feel like they're doing a terrible job all the time. And it's just not true. We always want more, and that's a good thing, but it can sometimes kick us in the gut. And so she tries to comfort those that are in the throes.
Another big thing that I've noticed over the last few years especially is her mentoring the new generation of homeschool leaders in support groups and state leaders and other people who are coming up when you and I aren't going to be around forever, it turns out. And so it's a great thing to be mentoring those folks as well. So last time we talked in that great Lost to History podcast, I asked you, what in the world did you do as a homeschool dad as you were starting out your medical practice? And I thought that was fascinating. So don't mess it up.
Well, I don't know exactly how I explained it, but there were a couple of key roles that we decided early on that were kind of my department. And so we've determined that I was the thermostat of the home, and that I needed to really set the temperature spiritually educationally, what did we value? And there were a number of ways that we really went about that. And my role was to help the children sense what was normal in our home. And one of the normal things was that we valued scripture. So we had regular family interaction. I hate to call it devotions because sometimes it was just chatter. But so I was involved in that, but also the thing that my role to validate whatever education was done in the home, whether I was the source of the information or Jan was, or books were independently. I would have conversations with the children about what it was they were learning, not so much to check and go, well, tell me, what did you learn today? It was more of, hey, I want to know what you know, and I want to learn from you, and let's talk about it. So it was more of a conversational deal, and not so much of an inspector, not inspecting the fruit, but just enjoying seeing the fruit grow. And so there are ways that we go about it that really is kind of stifling, but finding joy in the process and being excited about what they're learning, that really helped to validate what it was that they were growing in. And so we did that, tried to do that in all the aspects, whether it was academic studies or whether it was their personal growth, their fleshing out of who they were and what their passions and interests were.
Well, that's all really good. Wow. So what I remember you saying, though, is that as a newly minted medical doctor starting out in a new practice, your role in the homeschool was quite different, and your homeschool took on a completely different character than what a lot of homeschools do. And that to me was so refreshing to know that, one of the things we say is that you get to tailor your homeschool to your family's needs and your children's needs and desires, and that's so in newly minted doctor.
Let me respond to that. In the early days of my career, there wasn't a lot of time. I was gone from early until late, and there were just lots and lots of demands, and that's where a lot of families find themselves, is one parent or the other is just overwhelmed, and there's just little small windows of time. So in those very early days, what it looked like for me as a homeschool dad is when I got home, we would wrestle. We would wrestle on the living room floor. And I would sometimes read little children's stories to them. I'd read, so that was kind of like their language at the time, So I did a lot of reading aloud. And we started with very simple books, and they progressed as the children got older. But that's what I was able to contribute at that time. As I was able to groom my practice commitments, I was able to do a little bit more of the morning hours. I would give them an hour in the morning before I left, and then whenever I got home in the evening, I was 100% engaged. That's my challenge to most dads, is to say, hey, when you come in, you're on your main job. After your job at the office, you come home to your main job, and maybe you just have an hour or two or three in the evenings. Make them count. And so my main job in those early years was read alouds. So we read lots of stories together, and it was books that I'd never read before. I wasn't much of a reader even before then. You think somebody goes to medical school, reads lots of stuff, and well, I kind of did, but they were textbooks. And so I was introduced to literature by reading to my children. So I grew as they were growing, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, my wife will say that too, that she, one of the things she enjoyed the most about homeschooling our kids throughout the years was getting exposed to things that she hadn't been exposed to as a child growing up. And now, a whole new world of as she's kind of learning things a little bit ahead of them, she was exposed to a whole new world of really interesting and exciting things. So, Dr. Smith, you have written a book, and it's called Parenting with Influence. Tell us about the inspiration for the book and what's it about? And you get to say the title 7 times, no more, but at least 7 times so that people will remember it and want to rush out and buy it.
Well, the key word in the title is influence. And it's not to say that other things don't come into play, but the background is this. We observed, observed in our own family, but also in studying other parenting books and also watching other families, is that in the end, as your children grow up and they develop their own ideas and their own desires and the capacity to go after life on their own, really all that you do have to work with is influence. You can't control them anymore. And so I have a graph in there. It shows that early, like in infancy, you have the most control you're ever going to have. And little by little, you're losing control. And then there's a phase where you so rapidly lose control, the ability to control, that it feels like a free fall, that your kids are, running away with life and you can no longer control them. And that's really true, but it's also a normal process and it's desirable. We want them to take charge of their lives and we want them to have self-control. And that's where we're moving to. And that's what we need to anticipate happening and not fight that process, but to embrace the idea that we want to influence them more than we want to try to control them. And so we do have to establish control, but we need to, as quickly as possible, move to that influential relationship. And that's what the whole book is about, talking about the different stages, what children are like, what their neurodevelopment is like, what their capacities and interests are like at different stages, and how our role as a parent must change, or we're going to be, as I described, I think, in the introduction or first chapter about teenage parents. You hear of the conflicts between teenagers and their parents just being constantly at odds with one another. And it's usually a battle over control. And so we don't want that to be true in our families. So we must begin to develop that kind of relationship that has influence, rather than us trying to force them to do something that they don't want to do. We want to affect their wants.
Yeah. So when you say that, as I read the book, it's not really. So if you say, well, I don't want to lose control, that sort of comes with a presupposition. And the book really helped me to realize that that's the natural part of it, is that we as parents actually don't want to lose control. We want to raise up independent, autonomous, virtuous children who can go out into the world. So it's not about losing control as much as it's about building into.
That's right. Yeah, it's a relationship thing, and you don't develop a relationship through rules. There are a lot of purposes for rules. Rules can guide us. Rules can train us, but they don't. That's not a way to manage a relationship over the long haul. And I always liken it to driving a stick shift car. At first, you have to have the almost rules, like first you put your foot on the clutch and while you have your foot on the brake, and you mechanically do all these different things. But before long, it's automatic. You don't even think about it. You're independent of the rules. The rules may still be there, but they're not the focus anymore. You're driving, you're not trying to shift. You're driving the car. And so in same way, if we use rules in a proper way, it will not hinder the relationship. It will actually foster the kind of relationship where we're more and more comfortable with giving our children freedom to live out those, really the character that's behind the rules. It's not so much about the rules. So we talk a lot about, give tons and tons of examples of how what it can look like in everyone's family. So.
Well, since you wrote about this in your book, it won't embarrass you for me to ask you to tell a personal story about one of those revelatory moments when you discovered this principle that you're now teaching others?
Yeah, it's interesting that it became more crystal clear, not with my first child, but my third one. Because our third one was the one who really challenged us the most. Our first one was more of a compliant child. And, at first he was a challenge. But our third one, whenever he was 13, I was trying to, I asked him to practice a speech for a speech event. And really what I was doing was telling him to practice the speech for me. And he just, he put his foot down and said, nope, not tonight. I'm not doing it. So I felt compelled that I had to win. Because I was under this operation, this mindset that the parent needs to be in charge, the parent needs to have authority, and those things are true. But in this scenario, I felt like those things would only be true if I won the situation, the battle of the wills. But I realized very quickly that he had me in stalemate, checkmate, and that I couldn't make him, and he was in control. And so very quickly I realized, I said, okay, Rodney, that was my challenging child, Rodney, and he's been a great blessing in our lives. So even though he was difficult, we've had a great and rich relationship. But it brought to the fore that control wasn't the way to manage a teenager. I needed to use a different technique. And I began to try to go, okay, how do I describe what's happening here for other people so that they will not feel compelled like I felt compelled at that time to win? What does winning look like with a teenager? And that's when we realized, okay, influence is rooted in a relationship, and the relationship has to be the source for moving our teenagers along. And sometimes what we're wishing for them is not what they're wishing for themselves. And at some point we've got to, the relationship is the way to get to the wants rather than the rules. So Rodney brought it to the front. He had me, I looked back at him and I realized he's got me.
So what happened? Did
yes.
Did you make him do the speech? What was the result?
The end of the story was,
is Rodney still around?
He's still around. And Jan says, I'm so glad I didn't shoot you, Rodney, because he made us both mad. But that night, I looked at him and I said, okay, I realize I cannot make you practice that speech. I really wanted you to do well tomorrow. And I see that you're as prepared as you want to be. And that's okay. This is your life. And it's not about us. And so I'm going to bed, and I hope you get some sleep, because tomorrow's coming whether we sleep or not. And tomorrow you will be giving your speech to someone besides me. So I just had to own up to the fact that he won and he was in charge. And that was the truth. He was in charge of that issue, because I had told him, I said, I'm not going to bed tonight until you practice this speech. And he just sat there silently, and I went, oh no. I realized he was going to keep me up all night. And I went, okay, you win. I'm going to bed. And but I didn't kill the relationship. That was the real value there, is that I decided not to kill the relationship by trying to win a battle.
Yeah, you reduced this a little bit, not reduced this, but in the book you talk about, you have a mathematical formula. Not that analytical guys like you and me, reduce everything to a mathematical formula, but it's a really good mathematical formula.
Yeah, the formula is this. R, it's all the letters R. If you can't understand R, the way I say it, it's the 20th letter or something in the alphabet. Okay, R plus R minus R equals R plus R. And Obviously, it's not a very good mathematical equation. The only way that could be true if everything is zero, but it stands for the R plus R is rules and regulations. And if rules and regulations is really dominant in your family and your relationship with your child, the other side of the equation stands for resentment and rebellion. And if resentment and rebellion is something you're seeing in your home, I can tell you that rules and regulations are really strong, because rules and regulations that minus relationship are really in properly said is out of balance with the relationship. If the relationship is weak, there's very little relationship, or it's a negative relationship, rules and regulation will lead inevitably to resentment and rebellion. And so if we look at it in reverse, if resentment or rebellion is present in your home, I tell you, the relationship is where you need to work, not working on the the rules and regulation, because none of us, whenever new rules or regulations come out in our work or in our world or in tax season or whatever, that really aggravates the fire out of us. But so it's all that has to be couched in a deep, abiding relationship, and that takes a lot of work. But that's really where the solution is, and so that's what we want to work on, is an influential relationship.
And I talk about homeschooling being a really good kind of cauldron for building relationships amongst parents and children, amongst children with siblings, children in their community, because I had a similar sort of revelation, not so eloquent as yours, but where you realize that the relationship is what you're going to have for life. That speech is, that's ephemeral. The speech, and whether he won the tournament or lost the tournament, that's not going to last very long. But that relationship is eternal. So that's what I really like about the formula, is it helps you to identify problem spots, but the purpose is to focus back on the relationship.
Yeah, that is what you're left with, is the relationship. And in reality, that's what we want most. We want an abiding relationship that is close, and somehow we think that we're going to have to chip away at their, at all their flaws with these rules and stuff. And so the rules are very important early on, because they teach them what is normal and expected. But as time goes on, the rules should be playing less and less of a role. I'm not saying you don't have a curfew, expected normal, but what if the curfew is broken and there's a very good reason for it, and you have the kind of relationship where they go, Dad, this is what happened, and I had to do this, and this is why I'm late. And we have the relationship where we can hear them, and we go, you did the right thing, and not get hung up on, but you were late. So we've got to resist the but add in, whenever we realize that they were seeking to do the spirit of the law, and whatever it is. And there's going to be lots of times where the rules of the household are broken, but sometimes they're broken for a good reason, and on purpose.
Well, and in my own experience, I have broken rules for bad reasons too, and not always had a great excuse. But even then, that's the great thing about our faith, is that we can always come back to the relationship we have with the Father, no matter what. And for me, that's a big part of your book, is that the modeling our Heavenly Father in our homes.
So
question mark. So I occasionally rant, but just take my rant and put a question mark at the end of it.
In the end, that is the standard for our relationship with our children, is how our Heavenly Father's relationship is with us. And We talk about his mercy, his grace, his kindness, and that he has good plans and good desires and for us. And it's not about restricting life; it's about advancing life and seeing every child's innate qualities as good. There's lots of times when we were reading stories together, the children would be playing on the floor in front of us with toys or different things, so they weren't having to sit next to us and be still and listen. They were always active as we were reading the stories. And one of the things that Emily did, my daughter, who's our number 2 child, is that she always loved to cut out paper. She would get scissors and she would have a coloring book that she had colored, and she'd cut out all the little figures and very precisely cut those things. And we thought it was just child's play. And today she's a fashion designer. Today she uses those scissors professionally. We did not know the impact or the importance of what she was doing that we thought was just her occupying her time. And there are things like that will happen in every family as you look back and go, they always did this. And we either were aggravated by it or we ignored it or whatever. But it's part of the plan for their lives. And so the more that parents can be sensitive to those things and say, gosh, you're really good at this. Let me get you a better tool for that. You're really good at, whatever, so in Emily's case, it was cutting. So we got her better scissors. We didn't know that was part of her life's plan. It was just, we said, you're good at this. Let's get you a better tool. And one thing led to another, and there she is. So, but every child is like that. There's something that they're doing that you don't know. Our oldest child, he was really prone to leadership. So we took him to adult leadership conferences whenever he was just 14 and 15 years old, where there was only businessmen there. But he soaked it up, and so it was an advantage to him later in life.
Yeah, so that's in addition to the just general parenting, seeking out the relationships. That's another huge advantage of the home education thing that we decided to do together, right? The ability to recognize that and allow a child to focus on who they are, where they're heading, to figure out their talents and their desires, and to really nurture those things in a positive way, rather than make them kind of go through lockstep with, year after year after year. It's a liberating thing.
And the one of the huge advantages to home education is that you have time for some of those things. You talked about earlier the relationships between the siblings and the parent and child. You have time to work on those relationships. Whereas we look at folks that are, scurrying out of the house, trying to get everything in the car or out to the bus and get them, to the school. And then they get home and they're exhausted and they have other activities and they never have time for working on their relationships and growing to really love and admire one another. So there's huge benefits of having some time to work on the relationship, but also to work on these special or unique giftings or interests that the children have. So that's definitely one of the, I don't even know if it's a side benefit. I think it's really a mainstay.
No, I totally, I came at this from, okay, we can homeschool, for a year maybe, as long as as long as it's demonstrated to me that this works educationally. That's where I started. And then I realized, today I look back on it and we're all done homeschooling our 7 children, but it was, I came to value it for completely different reasons. It turns out, this is kind of a weird discovery. It turns out that children are learning machines. And, it's hard to hold them back from learning. But relationships are fragile, and relationships need a lot of nurturing, a lot of care, which leads me to my next. So you haven't done this, but I'm going to do it for you. Chapter 6 of Parenting with Influence by Dr. Roger Smith. Does your child feel the love? And last time we talked, you talked about you really valued Dr. Ross Campbell and his approach. Let's talk about that just for a few minutes.
I read one of Ross Campbell's books. I may have been in college whenever somebody had me read the book. And obviously that was before I had children. But somewhere in the early days, I read this book and it was titled How to Really Love Your Child, which I didn't really think a whole lot about the title, I guess, at first. But the opening part of the book is, he says, there's not a lack of love from the parent to the child, but there is a great problem that the child does not feel loved. He said, so you can love, but the child might not feel it. And that was the premise of the whole book. And he talked about the aspects of how to communicate effectively that you indeed love your child and that the child is loved by you. That's probably the most accurate way of saying it, that the child is loved by you. And and that effectively communicating that love opens up the relationship to where you can actually influence them. Because until someone feels cared for and known by you and understood by you, your influence in their life is going to be very little. So that was to me a kind of a pivotal chapter to help transition from the rules approach. I'm going to groom my child to be a good person to, okay, let's begin to have the relationship. And what are some components of it, some steps? And I simplified it. He had a little bit different language, but so I tried to make it memorable. And I used the word EAT. And each letter stands for something, one component of ways that we can communicate love. The E is eye contact. And do we only use our eye contact whenever we're upset with them and we give them the evil eye? Or do we give them a delightful look and look into their eye, into their actual pupil? So we can tell when people are looking at us, and it makes us think they're interested in us. So we've all probably had the experience of seeing, having somebody on the stage, they were singing or they were speaking or they were some noteworthy person, and they made eye contact with us in the audience, and we thought, they looked at us. Somehow we know, and it communicates that they, or at least were interested in us in some way.
So I'm just going to wrap this up because I have the book right in front of me. E is eye contact. A is attention, the really focused kind of attention. Incidentally, this advice in this chapter is not good just for raising kids, but it's really good for any relationship, especially really intimate, close relationships between husband and wife. So we've lost Roger. The last letter is touch, and so eye contact, focused attention, and physical touch are the three formulas. So we're going to wrap it up, even though Roger has lost connection, possibly because of the storm that we talked about. I just want to thank Dr. Roger Smith in his book, Parenting with Influence. And he has a website that I was going to have him tell us about, rogersmithmd.com. You can find out more about Roger Smith and his wife, Jan, and find the book, Parenting with Influence there. That's rogersmithmd.com. And you can find out more about what we do here at HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, where our mission is to make homeschooling possible through a whole host of things that we do to serve the homeschooling community. And our website is hslda.org. You can go there and find out more about us. If you're not a member, you can join. And if you'd like to donate, you can do that too. So thanks again to Dr. Roger Smith, and the book is Parenting with Influence.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's Online Academy. When you're homeschooling a high schooler, it can be difficult to stay on top of everything they're learning. The good news is you don't have to do it all on your own. HSLDA Online Academy offers more than 40 live, interactive online courses for grades 7 through 12. And if you're an HSLDA member, you can save up to $125 per course. To view a list of course offerings, visit academy.hslda.org. That's academy.hslda.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.